All right, everybody. So here we are having a conversation with absolutely one of my favorite people on this planet. Uh, you're going to learn more about him. Duke Worthington. Man, I feel so honored that you are here.
It is an honor to be here.
Oh, come on, man. Give me a little bit more than that.
I'm serious. I could do it online,
Yeah.
or I could drive 4 hours to St. Louis and I could get to see you again, my friend. And this is well worth the drive.
That's true. So for everybody, Duke and I met a couple of years ago, and we were both members of the ACA Business Club. We still are.
Yep.
But he's out of the Kansas City Club. I'm here in the St. Louis, Missouri area. And we had met at a conference. And you know those conversations you just have with somebody? You meet someone, and usually something's exchanged, and you just think to yourself, oh, I'm going to like this person.
This is going to be fun.
We had that.
Oh, immediately. It was just cool. We were firing stuff back and forth, and very quickly knew that it was going to be fun.
Were we both speaking at that, or I don't even remember how it started?
You did.
I did some
speak
stand-up.
a little bit. You had a section in there that you didn't MC it, but you kind of set some things up and did some pretty cool stuff though, and just gave us an idea of how where
we're going, what we're doing,
riff and really have fun with this, and that was cool.
Taylor, do I riff ever on this podcast?
Did I don't say that?
No. So we had met, we started talking, and it was just simpatico. It just worked immediately. And probably over the last we've seen each other a few times. We talk fairly regularly, though, at least once a quarter.
Right. Yep.
And it's one of those things where, if I'm coming to Kansas City, I'm going to let you know I'm coming in town.
Yep.
We're going to grab a lunch. You were just, though, in Columbia, so you weren't too far from here.
Well, I actually live 100 miles north of Kansas City, so I'm in a little town, Chillicothe, up there in nowhere. But
can you say that name again for
Chillicothe.
us?
Chillicothe, Missouri.
All right.
It's 100 miles northeast of Kansas City, and I moved back up there to spend time with my parents. My dad had dementia, and so 6 years ago I moved back in my old hometown, actually living in my old bedroom I grew up in.
Nice.
There's a unique experience to go back to.
Heck yeah. Is it the same bed? Is it the old twin bed? No, I'm just kidding.
It is. You nailed it. And no one else has ever asked that question. Thanks so much. But I'm there, and I've got a daughter and a son in the Columbia area. So last night I buzzed down and got to have dinner with both of them, spent the night with my daughter, and then checked out the ACA club in Columbia this morning, went to their social.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I'm still involved with that and enjoy it. And so it cut my trip in half.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So he came here. He said, if I'm going to be in the area, I might as well come out, hang out with Dallas, and let's do something in St. Louis. So after this, we're going to get lunch. Taylor, you are welcome to come to lunch, by the way.
Please.
We don't have her mic'd up today because it's the mic that Duke is on. So that's where Taylor normally gets the microphone from. But let's so we could just talk for hours, and people are going to go, why is Duke
What's the
here?
purpose? Yes.
So you've lived the thing. It's like, oh yeah, it's that guy. So you were the guy with the wife, the kids, the white picket fence.
You're right. Good memory.
Yeah. So you kind of lived that whole life.
Yeah.
That's one part of your story. However, there's a whole other part of your story here, divorced and and obviously what you were just telling us there. But tell everyone really quickly a little bit about let's start with what you do. Let's start with like what you do now as a coach, because you're Coach Duke to so many people. Yeah. But then we're going to talk a little bit about this idea that there is a gap for most leaders between how they show up at work, how they show up at home, and what could be a possibility there for them to become who they ultimately want to be.
Yeah, that's huge.
Talk to us first a little bit about what you do, and then we'll get into your journey.
Yeah. Well, you nailed it. It was that journey of on paper I looked great, came back from the service, went back to my old scout troop and became a scout leader. Was elected in the school board, and then moved on to state leadership positions in the executive committee with the school board. Just was doing all the right stuff. Picture in the paper about something every week, the guy. It was kind of disgusting. But in reality, it was basically a facade. Yeah. I looked good. I went through the motions. I did everything. but I did a horrible job of showing up at home. At the time, I didn't realize that. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do, but I was not the greatest husband.
Yeah.
I didn't spend a lot of time with my kids in ways that was meaningful to them. It was usually because I wanted them to do something. I had a son who was extremely talented in athletics, had scholarships at many universities when he graduated, set many school records, set state records. Just he was that level. In fact, they were looking at him for Olympics.
Wow.
Ended up blowing out his knee and lost all those opportunities. But even then, it was still about me and try and figure that out. I've got two daughters that are amazing at this point now, have moved on and have families and are starting to have kids. My son, who's wrapping up his high school, he was several years younger, and so he's wrapping up high school and all of these things. But looking back, I somehow still made things about me.
I don't think that is a solo sport. I don't think you're alone in that. I think there's always how we show up in our different environments can be vastly different. Yeah. And my dad used to actually say to us, we were show horses. Man, you guys look good when you're in front of people, but you come back and you're crapping in the stables and you're doing what horses do. And my brother and I were like, yeah, but horses have to crap, Dad. But it's that idea. I think a lot of people, they show up. This is not every personality type. Yeah. Some people just automatically, authentically be who they are, no matter what. They show up at the same level, but other people, it's like, man, I'm gonna perform well here, but you're gonna see the dark side. Yeah, back home.
I think using the word perform is a powerful way to describe it because looking back, it was more of a performance. And so a lot of the work I do now and I've learned, and obviously there was huge transition. Yes, I did lose a marriage after 23 years. The youngest was in college and was moving on with his life, and it was just the two of us. And the two oldest girls were actually stepdaughters. They've always been mine, and I never call them stepdaughters because they are my girls.
Sure.
And so Angie was my wife at that time was a few years older, and we got together with a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old daughter, and then we had Brandon, so he was 6 years behind the youngest.
Yeah.
So that's how that came back. So we had a son then. But looking back at that gap that we talk about, and you mentioned performing, I recognized how well I did that. Picture in the paper all the time, all the accolades, all the things up on the wall, my wall of shame, and it just kept building until it didn't feel right.
Sure.
And I don't know when that happens, but for a lot of people, it happens at different times in their life that they begin to recognize that something's off.
Yeah.
And I was climbing corporate ladder and worked for a national company and actually ended up moving out to Colorado to take over an office and run that. After that time frame, started a couple of businesses of my own, doing training and sales training, management, those types of things. But I was speaking in communications and working on that stuff, thinking that I understood some of the things you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Leadership and actually in the school board arena. That's what I was hired to do, was to consult for the Missouri School Board Association, and I taught leadership and board governance. So they're taking me all around to all the schools in the state.
That's a gig.
And I'm doing it, all these great ratings. And again, I'll tell this story quickly because everything's still kind of together.
Yeah.
And I make a presentation based on their material I would present, but then add my own stories and things trying to connect with the people. When I got done, I got all kinds of attaboys and really great job. But there was something that felt hollow. And I had to check out of my room early, so everything was already in my car. And the presentation then, I'd stayed the night, the presentation then went into early afternoon. And as I'm going out to get in my car, I sat down at the steering and I grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. I hadn't even started the car yet. And I literally just took a deep breath and felt like I'd been kicked in the chest by a mule. I mean, it just took the air out of me. And it brought tears to my eyes. I thought, what in the world are you doing? You put on a great show, good looking shirt and tie and the suit and hair all done right. And man, I'm really the showman up there and I'm just doing it. But I recognized that it was not real, and I could go through the motions and really do a great show on stage, but it wasn't me.
Yeah.
And that was a start of a turn where I began to question what was going on in my life.
There's also another interesting factor that it begins to occur with that, especially for the performer types. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking actor performers. I'm talking the show horse thing that we've been chatting about.
That persona that we choose.
The success persona, the leadership persona. Our children see that difference, and they see the distance between the two. Yeah. And it's like, well, wait, Dad, all these people love Dad for who he is, but the version they see at home doesn't equate and match up. And I remember that in my own life. I remember a few years ago just working like a dog on some stuff. And I tell this story sometimes from stage, and I have yet to be able to start to tell this story without getting emotional. So just bear with me on it if it happens.
I'm still wiping a bit of a tear from what I just told. So
so at the kitchen table one night, this was a few years ago now because the youngest was still like baby-ish. But the older two, the middle son, he was just hungry, and we sat down. I came out from my office and sat with them, and he ate so fast. And he said to Mom, he was like, "Mom, I'm done. Can I go ahead and be dismissed? And can I go ahead and leave the table?" And the oldest son, he said, "No, Arthur, but now back then we called him Artie." He said, "No, Artie, stay here. This is the only time we get to see Dad in the day." And I work down the hall. And my wife just immediately saw it land. Like, I was failing as a dad. I was failing as a husband, no matter what other successes came. And she looked at me and she caught my eye, and it was one of those don't take it there sort of things. And I'm like, no, I have to take it there. Because there was a huge gap between the way I was showing up out here and the way I was showing up at home. Wow. And it shifted everything. That one sentence from my oldest son, "No, Artie, this is the only time we get to see Dad." I was like, no, I want to be the dad who's not that.
For the
and also who's not inconsistent either. Because that speaks to Duke a larger lack of, I'm going to use the word integrity. Let me define it. But the integrity is actually the full integration of who we are. We talk on the pod all the time about this idea of alignment, purpose, passion, mission, all of these things. But integrity, the opposite, I always define it by its opposite. So most people, if you say, what's integrity, they're going to answer with like, what, character, right? Truth, honesty. To me, the opposite of integrity is actually disintegration. It's going to fall apart if it has no structural integrity.
Okay.
So what, just like a bridge or a building that hasn't been cared for would disintegrate.
Integrity versus, yes, that makes sense.
And so when there's a part of your life that's falling apart, you have to ask the question, where am I out of integrity, or where am I disintegrating,
right,
compartmentalizing, whatever it is. So you discovered that.
Powerful. Yeah. And it was a minor deal. It was just one of those where something inside had felt off for a long time.
Yeah.
And it began to now really push harder in me that something was off. And it was still all looking pretty good.
Sure.
And so I was still married, and son was about finishing up high school at that point. And that's when things really started to get crazy. I took another position, which I had a history of doing, of taking over a business. I'd be invited in as usually a general manager position. Mm-hmm. I'd be invited in. I'd spend about 18 months to 2 years. I'd get things rocking and rolling. I'd get the right people in the right spots, find somebody to take my place.
Yeah.
And then I'd go, see ya, good stuff. And my poor wife had followed me through the Army and my moves in 5.5 years.
Yeah.
And then every 2 to 3 years, I'm moving again, taking on another project.
Sure.
And so after 23 years, I gave up on one that really had all the perks and benefits, nice salary. She thought we were there. Our son was in college. We had grandkids we were getting to visit.
Yeah.
We were at that spot. And I said, I'm done. I'm going to take the summer off, and I'm going to go work out scout camp in the mountains of Colorado and help a buddy of mine out that
was
needed.
that just from personal burnout?
It was. I did not do well in offices.
Okay.
And so I had this position. I found a guy that was awesome to replace me.
Yeah.
And he was so much more gifted in the things as far as organizing. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
And he thrived in that and
Yeah.
really worked well. And I was tapped out. And so I was able to spend that summer, which to me was one of the most amazing summers I got to spend in the mountains. I'm mountain biking, I'm running. In fact, when I finished up that time, I was doing some adventure racing. I mean, I was rocking and rolling, feeling the best
Adventure racing?
I was mountain
What the heck
biking.
do you mean by, like,
So would they
is this
give
like
you-
an Iron Man for the mountains? What is it? What's adventure racing?
You'll a lot of times do different things such as maybe canoe or swim or kayak.
Okay.
That'll be part of it. You get on a mountain bike and have a route that you've got to run,
Right.
and then you've got to run. I think we ran 6 miles or whatever in some
So
of
the
them.
basic premise is we're just going to drop you off in a remote location,
here's
whatever it takes to get to the
Here's
finish
a
line.
compass and a map.
Do that.
And,
Yeah. Have
good
a great
luck.
time. Adventure
Yeah.
race.
Hit these spots and
It's kind of like that TV show, The Great Race.
Yeah,
That was.
it's-
I don't even know if it's still on,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I was like, hey, you've got to get here to here to here.
Yeah, and it's outdoors and it's challenging, and I was just having a blast.
Sure.
And so I came home feeling, and I laugh and say I was as zen as I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
I got all of that out. I had a position when I came back, the owner of the business that I had stepped down from as general manager.
Yeah.
He said, will you still run our sales force? And I said, yeah, that sounds cool.
Mm.
Because I can get out and go do that and do
Right.
things.
You're not stuck in the office.
And so when I came back, that's when I was really excited to spend time with my wife at that time because we'd never had alone time. A little bit of time that my son went off to college,
Yeah.
and I'd taken a new position and really putting a lot of hours in. And so I was excited about that. And she let me know that that was the last straw, me taking off for that summer and walking away from what she
boy.
considered a really good job. And we talked a little bit, and I had not been, and that's when I really began to realize I had not been the best husband or
Sure.
father.
Sure.
And so off we went after 23 years, and I had a really dear friend of mine hook me up with the concept of life coaching, which in the 90s was unknown around.
Still fairly
anywhere.
new. Yeah, it was still a
very,
nascent
very-
industry.
Yeah, and East Coast and West Coast had a little bit of it, but nobody around in the Midwest had a clue what it was.
Right.
And I'd been studying that, and so after the divorce, I thought, well, I'm going to dig into this and see if I can learn more. And so this process, I'll shorten the whole story, but the process went to that where I began to study and learn more. And I'd been presenting on communications and talking about that for quite a while, state conventions and keynotes, and the communication process just intrigued me. And I knew how powerful it was for relationships, how powerful it was. And I did a lot of leadership training. So I really focused on the communication, and I had a wonderful whatever you want to call it, spiel on the stage. I did wonderful.
So wait a second, Mr. Communication guy, you know exactly what it's called. It's not a spiel. It's a keynote.
It was a keynote, but it was kind of a
look at you even now. You are shirking
I am,
what the
because
industry calls it. There's a thing. Get this on camera. Look at what's happening to him physically. He's falling out here.
It's just looking back at that. I knew all the stuff, man. I had the cool tricks, and I had the exercises, and I'd bring people up, and I'd really stress the importance of communications. And so that was a part of my life that I was still living that facade.
Yeah.
So I stepped right back into it. Angie and I divorced, and I head back out to Colorado and get some license out there in insurance, and I'm going to do that in investments, and I tear into it, but my heart's not in it. It took the wind out of my sail, as it does for a lot of people. And I began to just dig in more and more about what relationships are about. I had some amazing mentors, and as the old saying goes, when the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
And I had people that showed up in my life that asked powerful questions, and I began to look back through mentors over the years that I had who were attempting to point me in a direction that was more congruent. I use that word a lot. You said that gap between.
Yeah, I mean, congruence is very similar to integrity, but understanding the gap between how you show here and how you show here.
Yeah, and I talk about so many of us, so many leaders, and I'll jump back to one thing that you and I have talked a lot about.
Yeah.
We're both introverts.
Yes.
And so for all the stuff I did on stage and all the presentations and always being out there, it sucked the life out of me. I would disappear for days after a presentation to re-energize and to get myself going again.
So really quickly for the audience, because the moment they hear a word like introvert, they think a particular type, and nobody believes it when they find out I'm an introvert. But just really quickly, if you're listening to this, introversion and extroversion has so much to do not with how loud you are, but it has everything to do with where you get your energy.
Yep.
And extroverts feed off of being with people. They're not purple people eaters. Some can be, but so can introverts. They just need that crowd. They need that energy.
Yeah.
Introverts, on the other hand, need a lot more alone time. They need a lot more of that. I got to recharge my battery. Boy, I've had a lot of social output.
Yeah.
Now I need a lot of like secluded input.
I go to the
which
timber.
Which is
Yeah.
probably why nature worked so well
Nature
for you in
is
those
powerful.
crazy,
Yeah.
insane races that I still do. And P.S., you've, I know from your bio as well, you've rappelled out of helicopters. You've done 14,000 foot ascents. I mean, you're kind of a,
I've done a bunch of that.
you're kind of a guy.
I've done a bunch of that.
And you still do.
I rode a bowl and rodeo, and so
Time out.
just,
Wait. Hold the phone.
I broke horses and
You rode a bull at a rodeo?
6 seconds. I didn't make the 8.
Oh, well,
He hadn't been ridden in 2 years.
I'm sorry that the 2,000 pound animal kicked you off in a whole 6 seconds.
And I would have continued to ride.
What in the world? All right, so you're doing these adventure
Yeah,
races,
yeah.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Doing mountain ascents makes perfect sense to me. Even if you were like Dallas, I was a skier. I was like, I know you play pickleball now. Like all of these things make sense. But at what point in all of this incongruence that we're talking about right now, did you actually say to yourself, I'm going to ride that bull?
Seemed like the thing to do.
Oh my gosh.
I'd ridden horses all my life. I had a pony from the time I was 5 on and bought a horse.
Why do I get a feeling that there are a lot of tombstones of people who die doing stupid stuff, and the tombstone reads, seemed like the thing to do?
That
seems like you're nominating yourself for a Darwin Award right there.
We have to go back. It was in my 20s, early 20s.
Okay,
so
it wasn't part of the summer.
No, it was before. And
Zen.
actually, my wife, we were going on a date, and no, wait, the story gets better. I had taken. She would not go out with me. She's 4 years older, and she would not go out with me.
Okay.
And her sister and I actually were just a year apart in school. So she said this, I'm not going to. I said, listen, there's a Disney movie coming. Let me take you and the girls. And her mom said, if he's going to take you and the girls, you got to at least go out.
Sure.
So I played the nice guy, and I was sincere about it.
Yeah.
Those girls were just awesome. I fell in love with them as soon as I got to hanging around them.
Yeah.
And so we had done that, and I went to go ride, and she didn't know about it, and came back, and her and some friends were actually going to come out to the bar. We'll just say it. It was a bar, and I'm there with my goat roping hat and my cowboy boots and everything else. And I come back from the rodeo, and she's sitting in the booth, and she said, "What have you been doing?" I said, "Well, I just finished a rodeo ride and was coming down here to cool off, to wet my whistle, as they say."
Oh my gosh.
And she looked at me, her face just turned white, and she said, "Are you going to go ride a bull again?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm scheduled." I said, "I'm looking to do more of this." And she said, "Well, then we're done."
Okay.
And I looked at her, and she said, not that many years ago, I went up to a small community, a very, very close friend of the family. And lost one of my best friends, watched him get stepped on and die in front of us. And she said, if you want anything to do with that sport, I'm out. So that was my last rodeo ride.
And then in the TV show of your life, Garth Brooks' song started playing.
Somebody in, yep.
It's the bulls, the blood, the dust, it's the mud, it's the roar of a Sunday crowd.
I do like that song.
Well, we all do.
Everybody does.
We're going back to 1994 at this point, or whatever year that came out.
So she stopped it in its tracks. That's why a lot of that part of my life really did. When I met her and started dating her and the girls, there was a responsibility that I began to realize that I had not really paid. I was invincible up to that point, I thought.
Do you think that was actually where the split began? I'm not your therapist.
Yeah,
but
no.
you chose.
I was just going.
I'm going to choose this route.
Yeah.
But there was this obviously there's this weird cowboy thing in you.
Yeah. Well, that went into the Army then. As we got married, I went into the service then and became a rappel master and a PT master and did lots of crazy fun things.
Gotcha.
And so that continued on for several more years, but it was through work.
Right.
That I was doing those things.
Right.
Yeah. So back again after all of those things and being a part, as you said, that I was, and the divorce happens, I go back out to the mountains again to regenerate and recuperate, talking about us both being introverts, and I didn't learn that for years and years because I thought I can't be an introvert. I'm in front of everybody. I'm president of this organization. I'm giving this presentation, and it never made sense until someone finally slowed me down, as you just did a wonderful job of explaining, and said, no, that's not what this is about.
Yeah.
It's about how you regain your energy. And the greatest example was, I've got a very close friend who is such the extrovert.
Yeah.
And we'd set up a golf match, or we'd get ready to go do something, and when I'd get there, there'd be 6 other people there. And I'm freaked out because I think it's just the 2 of us going to go ride around a cart and have a good catch-up conversation, and now it's everybody and their beer, and it's a big, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to do
Thought
this.
We were going to have a deep one-to-one conversation.
But it just, even when I talk about that example,
I saw you physically change just now.
It just doesn't feel right. Yeah. I can put myself out and do it as you can, and I love it, and the connection with the people is so dear to my heart. Yeah. And coaching is what's so amazing for me, to be able to connect with a person and really have those conversations. But yeah, the energy is gained back out in nature.
So funny story really quickly. When my wife and I, before we got married, we did pre-marriage counseling.
Oh, nice.
We took a personality test, and we met with a counselor, and the counselors started laughing. They were reading through my temperament analysis, and they started laughing. And I was like, what? And I'm sitting here with my fiance at the time, now wife, sitting there, and I said, what's got you cracking up about that? And they said, this sounds not like you. I can't quite figure it out because you're such a performer, and you're kind of a ham, and you're like out there.
Yeah.
But it said, it literally said this: you will find yourself at the center of attention in every room you enter, and you'll hate every minute of it. And I started cracking up, and my wife, fiance then, just started laughing her butt off.
She already knew.
She already knew that about me. She's like, this is 100% Dallas.
Oh my gosh.
If we go to group things, Dallas will sit in the back corner, and next thing you know, there'll be 8-10 people talking and with him, and he's just like, I really didn't want to even be here. Yeah, I'll do it while I'm there, but yeah. For me, it's silence as well. It's different silences. I just went on a silence retreat a couple of weekends ago. I went to this little Catholic Hermitage. Maybe that's what we should talk about.
We'll talk.
I should talk about
at some point
on the pod. Maybe I should talk about some of my experience
share
there.
Some of that. Yeah,
I'm not Catholic, but went to this little place, and 60 hours of silence without a phone, without a computer, with just books and candles and nature. Oh man.
Isn't that awesome?
It was amazing. I came back, and my wife was like, you look different.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
Such cool stuff.
We're totally off.
I was just going to try and circle back and say,
look at you, tied up for me now.
Here's where things then begin to shift.
Yes.
Is that we're back to me going out to the mountains at scout camp, coming back, and my wife says, adios. I bumped around for a couple, 3 years after that, came back actually to Missouri to visit, and I had a friend here in St. Louis who was going through cancer treatment. Okay. And side note to him, he's just hilarious. He's not real tall. He was a professional musician, played with Greenwood.
What did he play, the kick drum?
No, he plays everything. Yeah, I get you. He played everything, but he writes music all the time.
Oh, that's cool.
And Lee Greenwood, who many people have heard of, he played for him like 7 years, toured all over the world with him. And so he's a cool guy and lots of stuff. But for a person who looks like the least athletic you could ever imagine, and I'm consider myself a above average athlete. Yeah. He kicked my butt in racquetball every time I showed up. So here's the kind of guy I am. Called him up and I said, how you doing? He said, treatments are going well. He said, I'm a little weak the day after treatment, but he said, for the most part, I'm doing great. I said, so when's your next treatment? And he told me, and I said, so that means Tuesday you're going to feel a little weak? And he goes, yeah. And I said, I'll be in St. Louis. We're going to play racquetball.
Oh, that's great.
And he cracks up. And I said, it's my only chance. You killed me every time.
Right. It's your only shot at it.
So I show up, and him and his wife, and she was always the ultimate matchmaker, introduced me to a gal that had just joined their church. And within a month's time, actually, it was not that quick. I then came back a few weeks later and actually had a date, and we went on a double date. And
did you take her to a rodeo?
No. We went to church.
Oh.
but it was a concert down in the Chesterfield Bottoms down there.
Sure.
And it was Randy Travis. He was a friend of the minister.
Oh, that's fun.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And so within a month's time, I had given notice to the job I had, and I had moved to St. Louis and was dating this gal.
Well, there you go.
And I'm in that process was certifying as a life coach.
Yeah.
And so we married quickly. I went full-time into life coaching, thinking I'm understanding this stuff.
Yeah.
And not recognizing what all these little messages had been bubbling up inside me were getting ready to really let me know I still wasn't quite congruent, on track.
Yeah.
Integrity, all of those things that we've talked about, it wasn't there because 3 years later she decided we were done. At this point, I'm lost.
Sure.
What is going on? And the only thing I could figure out was the constant in everything that had been happening was that guy that kept looking. And I know that's corny because so many people say it, but it literally was the guy looking back at me in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I thought of everything that's been going on and that's happened, I've pointed fingers at enough others now. It's time to recognize those three fingers pointing back at me.
Yeah,
and
you got to do the work.
That's when I dug in, and
Yeah.
I really dug in hard, was coaching more, speaking quite a bit at that point. I began to transition from just communications and leadership to what happens now. And there were a lot of things, I won't get into them because we've hit so much already, and I want to talk more about leadership and some of the things you're talking about and leaders in that gap. But I happen to have a C-suite group of leaders in a company, a large multi-million medical company, that asked me to come in and help them because there was a disconnect in communication. And that was kind of my specialty. This has been 10 years ago or more now. And I couldn't seem to connect the dots. I was scratching my head on this one. And I was working with them and talking about the same old stuff I had done when I heard something in the COO's conversation, and I called time out. I said, wait a minute, something's going on. And it's not at work. And I've heard a couple of comments, and your son's been in those comments. May we just step away, and could I have permission to ask you about your son?
Yeah.
And she took a deep breath, and she said, sure. And I found out that there was, I won't get into all the details, but it was pretty horrific.
Sure.
And prison time and other things. It was a rough situation. She had been a single mom raising this young man. And so I said, let's work on that. And so we started talking about it, and there's a story that I could tell about it that I guarantee I can't do it without crying.
Yeah.
But it's so powerful, and someday I'll share that. But the point to all of that was such a shift for me to ask that question about what was going on at home.
Yeah.
And the more I thought about that, I thought, that's the one thing I was so uber focused on, my appearance, how I showed up, climbing the corporate ladder, doing all of those things, that I didn't ever slow down enough to pay attention to what was really going on in my home.
Yeah.
And with my kids and my spouse at the time.
Yeah.
And so my next conversation with the CFO, I said, we're talking about some things, but just out of curiosity, how are things at home? And I asked that question. It turned the conversation around.
Yeah.
The CEO, I had the conversation, and I thought, well, next time I meet somebody, I'm just going to start doing this. And one of two things happened. It was almost across the board that I would ask someone, you're a great example of, I would ask how things are at home, and I have, and Meg, and I have not physically, but I've got to talk to her on the phone. We've done things, and I think you guys are awesome. If that question was asked of you, you would begin to tell me how amazing she was, stories you're already telling about your boys, things that you're paying attention to.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have been the case.
It wouldn't have been
4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
It would have been like, dude,
you
there's
were
a
doing
total
your thing.
incongruence.
Yes, yeah.
Between the two.
You're working towards that now.
Yeah.
And so here's the difference when I ask that question of somebody. I ask them, and their response is, oh my gosh, Meg, or my spouse, my wife, is just amazing. Mostly guys I ask this question to.
Yeah.
They're amazing. They're the rock of the family. It's why I am where I am today. And
Then you ask
so,
the woman?
No. And so
the woman's like, God, he's such a pain.
Well, that does happen sometimes. But when they come back with that response, it's just so easy for me to say, I'm so happy for you. That is cool, man.
Yeah.
So when we're talking and I go right back into the communication process, and how they're working through things at work, and I throw in some things at home, but it really begins to focus back on usually why I've been brought there is to do a whiteboard session or a presentation for the leadership. And so the fun part, though, is, and you can imagine how many others that I ask, how are things at home?
Yeah.
And the deer in the headlight look shows up.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's great. Everything's fine at home. And I'm like, yeah. Who are you trying to convince, yourself or me? And then I say, I've got some questions if you're open. And that's where my niche has really gone to.
There's an intriguing show. I've not watched it like my wife has. She's watched it. I think she's watched every episode. I watched the first few with her. There's a show called Severance on Apple, and Severance,
right?
But they basically have been, I don't know how they do it, but they basically have severed their work life from their home life. So when they show up at work, they have a different name. They don't know anything about their real world. And it's just kind of cryptic and creepy the first few episodes. But when they go home, they could have a wife and kids, and they have no idea when they show up at work, they're just this other person completely. And it's it's an intriguing thing based on what you're saying.
More real than we,
right. That's what it is we show up, again, different environments sometimes require a different version of you.
Sure.
I don't show up to my clients when I'm working with executive level people, and I don't show up as a discombobulated dad.
Yeah.
Like there is a certain level.
There is a professionalism that we maintain.
But the cut is really, if the leader you are at work doesn't transfer over, you may need to bump up the professionalism at work and in those environments. But if there's a total disconnect, if there's a total severance between these two worlds, and your kids would say, he's a horrible leader, and everybody else is giving you the awards for it, then it means you actually aren't applying the true principles of leadership across the board. And there are high-level principles of leadership. We did a pod a couple of weeks ago. I talked about this billboard that I had seen, and it was in front of this school, and it said, believe that a child is already the person they're capable of becoming. So that believe that they're already that person that they're capable of becoming, rather than somehow separating them down and talking down. And I think sometimes we don't show up at home with that same level of hope for our kids that we do for our team members, and that same level of hope for our spouse or significant other as we do for the upline, downline over here at work.
That really struck a chord with me. It's very similar to what I share with clients now, in that, first of all, I will say that I've learned beyond a shadow of doubt that one of the greatest gifts any one person can give another is the ability for that person, the chance for that person to feel truly seen and heard, to let them know that they matter, that there's somebody, and that you see that in them. So that billboard just reminded me of that message.
Yeah.
And I tell the story many times with individuals and in presentations about the essence of who we are.
Yeah.
And I believe with all my heart that the essence of every one of us is kindness, love, compassion. That's
Hopefully.
That's who we are when we're created. That's the spirit of who we are.
Yeah.
And then we can get in all the different religious beliefs and philosophical things that really don't matter. Because I ask people, I say, if you're sitting out on the beach somewhere looking out into the ocean and you're not worried about work and you don't have anything else going on, what's your state of mind?
Right.
Most people are very relaxed, very peaceful, and they don't often word it this way, but they're in love with what is, with the environment that they're engaged in.
If they're there long enough to allow that to take over. If it's only like, where's my phone, where's my laptop, I got to be on this. If they never fully unplug, then they still stay charged up. Versus charged up, but they're actually drained. As funny as it sounds.
It is.
You know, they're charged up from work, they're constantly plugged in, but they're actually drained, versus if we plug into, and we're saying this as introverts, I get this. Other people need more social for that. But that doesn't mean you have to be charged like you are at work. So let me ask you this, because I know we're running a little long on the pod, man.
Yeah,
Keeping my eye on the time. That's all right.
You're watching it. I know we're there.
I know we're past it, but who cares? It's you and me, Duke.
Okay, cool.
And if people are gaining value, they're gaining value. And you and I could do this for hours.
Yeah.
So you work with leaders to kind of bring that congruence, to show up as their true self in both environments, in every environment.
All right.
Really. You've heard me talk about the future you stuff. You've heard me talk about there's this picture of who we want to become.
Correct.
Out in the future. When you're talking with leaders who are in the struggle point, and you see that incongruence, have you ever asked them about who they want to become ultimately? What they want to be, what they like? What does the future look like to you?
I just had a client a couple of weeks ago. We were in conversation, and he's getting ready to sell walk out of his business, finish up, wrap it up, and I said, this is cool stuff. I said, we're going to continue our conversations. He wants to continue working with me. I said, so here's my question of you as we wrap our call up today. I said, what do things look like for you in 6 months?
Yeah.
And there was silence. I said, what does your life look like? You have an opportunity now to do things that you've talked about for years.
Yeah.
What does the future leader in you look like? Because I've known him long enough, and he's been a client and friend now long enough that I know what his priorities are and where he puts his life and puts himself out there. But I asked him to let me know what that vision is. What do you see yourself as? Yeah. And the thing, I want to turn this a little bit, because in the work that I do, Dallas, I have learned that most everything that we dedicate our time and energy is often, just as you're sharing, often in our workplace. Mm-hmm. And what I found is that's where I put so much of my energy, and let what was home not really be my focus.
Yeah.
And so when I start working with people, the first thing we do is we start really gauging how they're showing up at home. I just ask them simple questions, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're worthless at home and don't connect with anybody, and 10 being you are very kind, loving, you pay attention, you're compassionate, you're engaged, you're very curious. You've heard me speak about curiosity.
Oh, I love curiosity.
You're very engaged and curious. And I said, where are you in that? And they usually sit there and somewhere in the middle, maybe 2, 3, most of them, when you ask that kind of a question.
Yeah.
And so then we begin working on, how do you show up for your most significant others in ways that allows them to feel seen and heard? What happens in that process, and I tell them often just in my promoting what we're going to be doing, is that if you can do this at home, at work it's easy because you can put on the facade, you can show up, you can act like you have the leadership qualities and push your way through it, the old fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yep.
And that still happens in the workplace. What I ask people is to take a great big deep breath, be really brave, and lean into the relationships that are closest to you, because they're the ones that know how to push all the buttons.
Yep.
They're the ones that don't buy into your BS, we'll call it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, the kids are looking like, you're getting all these awards for leadership.
Right.
What?
Right.
And so I really work with them to make that their focus of how are they showing up at home.
Right.
And I want them to be as congruent at home as they are at work, because at the end of our time together, however long that may be, months, years, whatever it may be, I tell them that the bonus to all of this is, if you can show up for the people closest to you, who are often the most challenging to do that for, even though you care and love for them more than anybody else, if you can show up for them to the degree and the ways that I talk about, and I talk about the subtleties and nuances of really showing up for someone so they can feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
Your work, I guarantee, will go to another level, simply because you can't practice these things to the degree I talk about and not go back to work and do those in your connections with your employees, with your coworkers, with your partners, with the other C-suite. It's huge.
And I'll just interject here. Last year, so one of the things that we do regularly, you've heard me talk about our gentlemen's dinners that we do with our boys.
That's so cool.
So we will we quarterly will do a gentleman's dinner with our kiddos, and I cook up a nice meal. We usually have them try something. Last round it was scallops, and it was just like, oh, Dad, this is really good. Let's have these next time.
Yeah.
But we will also go around the table sometimes and we'll say, and this was the one in the fall, it was gratitude. And it was around between Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays.
Perfect.
And we were just like, hey, go around and say something you're grateful for about everyone at the table.
Ooh.
Flashback to what we talked about earlier in our conversation here of when my oldest son said to the middle one, hey, this is the only time we get with Dad, right? Come to this last fall. That was a few years ago.
Yeah.
Come to this last fall.
Yeah.
All three of my boys said, Dad, we love how engaged you are. We love how much you've changed. We love how you're less angry. We love how you spend time with us. The little one saying, I love that you'll come up to my room and just play action figures with me. And I realized I'm actually having more success outside because I'm succeeding more inside. And Earl Nightingale, author of The Strangest Secret, it's on YouTube. You guys can go find it, The Strangest Secret.
It's huge.
He defines the word success as the progressive realization of a worthy ideal.
Ideal role, yes.
Progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And when I realized that my ideal was to have an amazing family and that I get the privilege of raising kings, and I get to train those people to be better humans, and that I get the privilege of loving my wife, which I didn't always see as a privilege. Sometimes it was like an anchor. Sometimes it was we went through painful years.
Sure.
But when I understand the worthy ideal is that at the end of my life, future me, I'm able to look back and say, my children honored me. My woman loved me. The people that I came in contact with were positively impacted by me.
Those are the ones standing around your bed on your last
Right. And
breath.
that's the ideal.
Yeah.
And I saw in the fall, as we sat around that table, compared to a few years ago, I am progressively succeeding in this worthy ideal.
Wow.
And it was really powerful.
Very.
And even my wife said, that's different than what was being said a few years ago, wasn't it? And man, it blew me up in all the right ways, in all the good ways, because I realized there's more congruence, to use your term for it. But it's also because I have become anchored to a future version of me that I'm like, I'm so in love with that guy. You said you looked in the mirror at one point and said, there's this guy's the problem.
Yeah.
That was me for years as well, especially through my depression and mental health battles and all of that.
Yeah.
Now I look in the mirror and I see the future version of me.
Yeah.
And I love that dude. And I think if more leaders could actually begin to build this picture of who they want to be and how they want to show up in every environment, so they'll succeed in the progressive realization of that worthy ideal.
Worthy ideal. Thanks for sharing that. That's pretty cool. And to bring that back around, I'll wrap up a little bit of mine in that at that divorce, after 23 years, the first one, 6 years, 7 years later, I had another one. So within a short amount of time, I'd had two. But that first one, estranged family and friends, it's hard when you've been together all those years and have all those relationships that were very challenging. And it was a tough time. There was even a period shortly in that divorce that my son did not communicate with me for 6 months. And one of the most powerful lessons I learned was to quit demanding things of people. And so every week I would call and leave a message. I wasn't texting back then, but I would call and leave a message, and I would just say, hey, Brandon, just thinking about you. I love you. I hope things are going well, and I wish you the best. I never asked anything to call me back. I never left a message of, hey, how come you don't? Nothing. I just for 6 months did that. And one day he called me up and asked me a question, and we just trucked on like nothing had ever happened. I just had dinner last night with my daughter and son. Yeah. And I've realized over the years how disconnected we really were. Yeah. They tell stories about things that their mother laughs and shares, and I realize I was there. But you wasn't. Present. And so I learned so much about them and of all those estranged family members and friends and things that have happened as I've dug more into what it means to show up for others. And here's the real secret to this that I'm always so just grateful, but impressed with those that I work with or speak to who stop at some point in a conversation or presentation and they'll say, this really isn't about me showing up for others. It's about me changing myself. And I'm like, we just dug in.
Yeah.
Now it's on, my friend.
Yeah.
You just recognize what took me a long time. And when they make that shift, that they're not trying to fix anyone, which is a for the leaders and the people who run businesses, that's one of our biggest challenges at home is we are really, really good at fixing things, at delegating, at managing, at coming up with innovative ways to do it better, move us forward. I got to tell you, most family members don't want to be fixed because that means they're broken, and that's a horrible feeling. And so when I stress with people, well, don't fix anybody anymore. Stop. When you go home, you're just going to go home and love them, and you're going to listen, and you're going to go from there. So I wanted to turn that around, that in the years after that and the second divorce and digging into learning what it really means, the real message that I share is that you have to drop your facade. You have to get rid of the assumed need to be somebody, to impress people. Years ago, I heard a coach of mine share, and I think he was so on it, spot on. He said the greatest irony of humanity is that every one of us wake up in the morning with the strongest desire we have to be seen and heard for who we are, to be accepted for who we are, as we put on our armor and our makeup and everything, our facade that we wear for the day, which in essence never allows anyone to truly see who we are. He said it is the greatest irony. We go out wanting that more than anything, and yet do not give the other person a chance to see us. So my philosophy has been, let's step away from the self-improvement stuff that's been going on for many years, and I've listened to tapes since the late 60s and on about how powerful that can be. But the real message I share is that the intention you wake up with every day of how you want to show up for others, to truly do that, if that's your intention, you can only do that by being the genuine you.
I love it.
And that we talk about it. And that's where the power goes. And when you can show up in that genuineness, the essence of what I've talked about, that love, that kindness, that compassion, that curiosity that bubbles out of us naturally when we're calm and peaceful, it changes everything. And that's the essence of what I share. So when I do talk to those, and I use different terminology, speaking of intentions, but you talk about the future you, the future leader, those are the things that we dig into. Here's where you are now. You rate yourself a 4 out of 10 and how you're showing up.
You always got to start with the audit. You always got to say, where are we now? Where do we want to go?
Yeah, and you're a 5. What's it going to take you to get to a 6?
And how good will it feel when you're at a 7 or an 8 or then
take
you
a baby step. Let's
stop.
Stop. And then I ask them, so if that's what you can do to get to a 6, tell me what your vision of a 9 looks like.
Right.
And now we're digging into their future version of who they can be. And I ask them, if you learn these skills at home, then we begin to talk more about work. But I want them to cement their absolute 100% commitment for 2 things: to take full responsibility for where they are in their life right now today, and to take full responsibility for where they're going, and the commitment to show up every day with the intentions that will get them there.
I love it. My friend, thank you. This is good stuff. You and I could keep going for hours.
Oh, we could.
So I think that's a great challenge, everybody. I think for you to begin to think about where you are, where you want to go, do the audit. We've talked about auditing recently on the, it's not Scientology either. We've talked about it recently on other episodes of the pod a few weeks ago, but this idea that you just begin to audit where you are in things, and you do it without judgment as well. It's hard not to hate yourself sometimes when you realize what the gaps are, but the idea that you could investigate the issue without investing in the negative emotion is huge. And Coach Duke is one of these great guys. His podcast his website is under construction right now. You do have a book coming out, though.
I've got one. I contributed in a chapter, but I do have a new book coming out that's
so
about how we show up.
We'll make sure that we get his links for everybody. But I just want to say thank you to my friend for, first of all, for driving here to St. Louis and doing this in person rather than virtual. I love that. We're going to go get some food here in a few minutes. But the challenge, everybody, for you as a leader, both in business and at home, is how can you show up as the real version of you, congruent between the two, anchored to who you want to be, the principles that you can apply, right? Show up without all the facades, especially at home. Be the real version of you. And you know what's the last thing I'll say about this is there are points that I kneel before my kids. Dad takes a knee, we call it. Yeah. I'm like, guys, I got it wrong. Yeah. Can you forgive me? They are so much more responsive to that than anything else. So think about how you can take a knee and be authentically you, be naked and unashamed in front of your spouse or significant other, and just be like, this is the real me and I'm working on it. And I love that. Duke, thank you, my friend, for coming in and chatting with us today. I so appreciate you.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. So my friends, we will get notes on him, but you can connect with him online wherever he is found. We'll get again. They'll be in the links below. Oh. Thank you so much for joining us today for this awesome conversation, Taylor. Thank you, and everybody. Thanks, go Taylor. Out there, have a championship day.
Thanks for listening to my dad's podcast. For more tools, go to DallasDailyShow.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.